there's a reality that we are working in a very large ecosystem that has multiple data sources, multiple data types, multiple terminology. There's not a single taxonomy. And until that happens and until that level of adoption is completely ubiquitous, our ability to leverage the technology that we have to translate from multiple systems and create that common data model is really what's going to be driving this forward. And that's really what C4 is all about.
Welcome to The Working Capitalist, the podcast from the Working Capital Forum, where we speak to the people building the future of working capital. I'm Mike Hewitt. Now, over the past few years, we've seen supply chain finance evolve, but arguably in quite a fragmented way. There are more platforms, there are more funders, there are more programs, but not necessarily more control. So today's episode is about a different idea. What happens when you stop optimizing individual programs and start managing working capital as a portfolio? And to explore that idea, I'm joined by Shannon Dolan, who leads the C4 product at GSCF. Shannon, it's great to have you on. Hello.
Hello, Mike. Thanks so much for having us. Yep.
You're very welcome. So let's kick off with a perspective. You can tell me if this feels like something you recognize. So over the past decade, certainly we at the Working Capital Forum have seen supply chain finance go very much digital, but generally only at the program level. As you've got payables finance here, receivables finance there, and all sitting in silos. So as a result, it feels like a lot of corporates and funders on the other side don't really have a real-time consolidated view of their working capital exposure or the liquidity they have available. And that feels, reading about C4 and seeing some of the early releases you've made of it, that feels like a problem you were trying to solve. Is that fair?
Absolutely. Yes, it's absolutely what we're looking at. I would say it's maybe a little bit worse than even the word or phrase fragmentation implies, right? So I think generally what we've seen the industry build is a level of instrumentation, in some cases sophisticated, in some cases less sophisticated, that really sits on top of what I consider to be a disconnected foundation, right? So if you think of working capital as an ecosystem, those programs, the platforms, the funders, they're all the canopy layer, right? But that foundation, the roots, the data, the connectivity, the shared view, those are the roots. And without healthy roots, that ecosystem really can't thrive. And so C4 is really about tending to the roots and allowing that canopy to thrive.
Wow. So you've got a whole rainforest of visibility and control, which is great.
Yes, absolutely. That's what we're going for.
So in terms of blind spots, and this is something that certainly every corporate treasurer, and I'm sure plenty of people in procurement and shared services will also recognize, the digital technology is there, but there are just things you can't really get a grip on. So where are you seeing the biggest blind spots that potential customers for this platform have? Is it visibility? Is it control? Or is it more around decision making?
It's interesting. You asked the question as if I can answer with I can only pick one of them, right? And I think they're all interrelated, right? And so visibility is certainly the one that you see first. It's the one that kind of reveals itself, right? But control is the one that actually costs money or costs opportunity, right? And when you can see exposure at an aggregate level, when you can see the ability to find an opportunity and adjust funds or lever liquidity to drive growth, that's where the decisioning becomes most strategic. And that's really where we see the corporate treasurers wanting to be. We see our funder partners wanting to get to. And I think that's what's kind of dragging the industry a bit.
That makes absolute sense. But staying with that idea, I'm interested in what you're seeing before people get onto a platform like C4. Are people managing this stuff in spreadsheets on the back of an envelope? How are they doing it?
Yes, we see the full gamut, right? And what I will tell you is we do see spreadsheets. We see spreadsheets every day. And I think the reality is that, we're never going to not be using spreadsheets. But at the end of the day, I don't think you want that as your control system. You don't want that as your book of record. And so you always want a source of truth, and then you want to leverage spreadsheets for what they can do is to help you manipulate, analyze, organize that data, but that data needs to come from a single source of truth that's in a controlled system, right? And so I think that's what we see. We've been seeing programs and bringing programs on board from both funders and corporates that are coming off of spreadsheets. Yeah.
Excellent. So we've kind of defined the problem, if you like. There's this fragmentation. We just discussed it and some of the problems that causes. So let's get into C4 itself and what it does. You describe it in your launch press release as a connected capital control center. I love alliteration, by the way. Congratulations.
Yeah.
But it is a bold positioning. If we strip all of that back, is C4, have I got this right? Is it essentially a control layer that kind of sits above all the working capital programs you might run?
Yes and no. I think there's a couple of things in there that I want to be careful of, and maybe we'll unpack them a bit. But certainly the concept of C4 sitting above the stack. But as I kind of opened up with, it's really also about creating the roots, right? And so it's deliberately not another program and not another platform that's competing for wallet share, right? It's that layer that kind of brings everything together to help it make sense for both the funders and the corporates within the ecosystem, right? I kind of think of it as, the mission control for working capital, right? We've just experienced NASA doing this amazing moon mission here with Artemis 2. And if you were in tune with that at all, you saw the precision, the real-time calculations, the telemetry, that level of coordination and communication, right? That level of insight and coordination is something that I think we all in every industry should be striving for. And in industries where we're taking significant risks or taking significant stakes, certainly we should be looking to create and strive for that level of insight.
Wow. So moonshot levels of control of your working capital programs, which everyone will regard as a great thing. So it does sort of move the conversation then from, let's call it program execution, to portfolio management. And I'm not sure all that many corporates have thought of their working capital programs as a portfolio, but I guess they really are. And instead of saying, is my SCF program working, you're saying, how is my total working capital performing across the business? Was that really sort of where you started? Was that a core design principle?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly it, right? So I say this to my team and constantly, is that this industry is so deeply transactional, and it wants to be and it needs to be elevated and matured to a paradigm of portfolio management, right? And you had mentioned the bold naming in C4, Connected Capital Control Center, right? That's very deliberate, right? So connected, no more silos. Think about this ecosystem, this concept of being connected. The capital, there's all forms of capital. Those forms of capital, bank capital, non-bank funding, going into different program types, right? You think about control gives you decisioning options, not just monitoring, not just observation. And then that concept of center is all in one place, right? So you've got the Connected Capital Control Center. And so if you're a funder, right, that means treating working capital as a premium asset class, diversified, measured, priced on risk, not one deal by one deal. And if you're a corporate, it really means treating working capital as a strategic growth lever for you, not just opportunistically creating liquidity in the business. So I really like that evolution.
Makes absolute sense, I think, for a great many corporates. But let's get into the sort of the detail of this. How does C4 actually work? How does it unify data? I mean, you've got different programs, different funders, all of them with presumably different ways of expressing data and different ways of communicating it. How do you unify that data and put it into one place?
That's the whole magic, is the unified data model, right? That's what is going to allow for a funder to really understand their full exposure, a corporate to really understand the opportunity that they have within their business, either on the payables or the receivables side, of their balance sheet. And I think what happens there is there's a reality that we are working in a very large ecosystem that has multiple data sources, right? Multiple data types, multiple terminology. That taxonomy, there's not a single taxonomy. I know ITFA, for instance, one of the trade organizations here, they're working to try to create those level of standards, create some commonality in that taxonomy. Those types of things are really going to help to advance the industry. And until that happens and until that level of adoption is completely ubiquitous, our ability to leverage the technology that we have to translate from multiple systems and create that common data model is really what's going to be driving this forward. And that's really what C4 is all about. We're not promising kind of magic here, but that is what's happening when you start to assimilate all that data and distill it to a common data model that then allows you to gain all that insight.
But I guess all that magic is happening as far as the user is concerned behind the scenes, and what they're getting is a unified view. I'm just interested, what does a CFO or a treasurer see on the C4 platform that they perhaps wouldn't see today? So I'm a treasurer. I've had spreadsheets. I've had things written on the back of envelopes, and I've got a note of where everything is. I've now got C4. What am I seeing that I didn't get before?
So I think, if you're a CFO or a treasurer, right, again, you're looking program by program. You'll probably start out with one funder, which is probably your kind of house bank. But then as you grow and evolve, you're going to have multiple house banks. You're going to have regional house banks. You're going to have alternative funders. You're very quickly, as you mature your program, right, with maturity, just naturally comes complexity. And that's what C4 is built for, is that ability to help a CFO, a treasurer, to evolve their working capital and mature that working capital program in a way that eliminates that complexity and doesn't surface the complexity, because it will grow with you in that sense. And if you're already there, again, it's that distillation and bringing it all together into that common frame. You're able to see pricing across funders. You're able to identify opportunity in certain regions or locations to reallocate cash to fuel growth. You're being able to, as you get to that level of scale in a global supplier framework, if you will, you have local treasury teams. And rather than allowing for those decentralized decisioning to happen, because you just don't have the real-time level of information, because you don't have the full picture, you now can see that full picture and you can provide that decisioning either with confidence and or a level of control and approval above it. So that's the idea that we're working towards for corporates, is really when we think about a treasurer or CFO office and you think about global scale, right? It's being able to allow for those regional decisions to be made with confidence and with full understanding and or a level of kind of governance above them.
Which is, it will be, I guess, transformational. So we've got this exposure tracking, you've got liquidity monitoring, you've got, I'm guessing there are alerts from the platform if you're reaching certain thresholds. This feels a bit like we're moving towards a world, and you sort of touched on this earlier, towards a world where working capital is managed more like a risk portfolio than an operational process. Is that a fair indication of the kind of direction of travel in which C4 is involved?
I think so. Absolutely. Yes. I think that, again, that concept of evolving and looking at this asset class as a premier asset class that has a portfolio management view to it throughout all aspects of the ecosystem, not just on the corporate side or the funder side, but also the insurers are a part of this. And I think that's something that is a little bit, I don't want to say missing, but is, again, that connectivity, that fabric that threads it all together and allows for the proper information sharing in a real-time way that allows for the opportunity to be captured is what's key. And I think that exists in other aspects of financial services and other asset classes. And those have evolved, I think, much more rapidly from both the telemetry and the data aspect. This industry, in my view, isn't about information arbitrage, right? Funders are stating a strategy to say, here's my risk box, right? Whether you're a bank or you're not, and here's the type of industries that we want to fund. Here's the level of risk that we're willing to take. And yes, information helps to, and data really helps to inform and be able to figure out, are you in the box? Are you out of the box? But it's not about necessarily having the arbitrage of that information that creates opportunity like we see in other asset classes like hedge, as an example, right? And so I just don't think this industry is about that information arbitrage. And so there's an evolution and a maturity that has to come with this as we do elevate to that concept of working capital really being, considered a premier financial asset class here.
This is a really interesting direction to go in. And let's just stick with the platform a little bit longer, because in a moment I want to move on to how this leaves you and GSCF in terms of positioning for the platform. How dynamic does this process come within the C4 platform? Are we talking about sort of actively reallocating capital across programs, or is this more a reporting tool, but the execution piece, moving things around or reallocation needs to happen elsewhere?
Yeah, it's interesting. You were coming eerily close to hitting one of my trigger words or one of my trigger concepts, right? So I'm so happy you actually didn't use the terms. I'm going to use them. And so you did kind of get there with, is it a reporting tool, right? And so reporting tool, dashboards, single panes of glass, moms, managers, or monitors of monitors, those are all triggers for me, because I think they really diminish the level of intelligence that belies these platforms and the level of insight that they provide, right? And so a dashboard or a report is going to tell you the house is on fire. What we're doing with C4 is we're giving you the hose in order to redirect it, to put that fire out, or to capitalize on that opportunity. And so you talked about dynamic reallocation. You have the idea of looking at pricing decisions from a supplier level on a funder basis. You have scenario and stress testing. Where we're going is, and we've already started to introduce it to our clients, is the idea of ecosystem level insight. Again, when we come back to this concept of most of this industry, whether you're a corporate or a funder, you're working at a program level. And so you move to this portfolio level, and that's great. And that's a huge advancement. It's a huge step forward, because it gives you a view of your particular risk, your particular portfolio. But where the real kind of meaningful and hugely valuable contributions come in is when you can look at ecosystem and you can look at benchmarks. You can look at, what is the rest of the ecosystem doing? Can I gain intelligence to know that a particular buyer perhaps has payment issues or historical payment issues? Can I understand different, those types of characteristics and learn from others that I can make better informed decisions? And again, it's not about that information arbitrage. It's more about, here's my defined risk portfolio, and how can I best inform? Am I staying in that box or am I not? Do I want to pass on this deal, or is this like right in my lane and this fits what I'm looking to do? And so again, I think dashboards, reports, moms, they don't provide and they don't accurately reflect, in my view, the level of intelligence and the level of insight that you get from platforms. And that's really where C4's laying.
So let's just push into that, because that is interesting, where we aren't talking about something we simply look at and say, oh, yes, that's happening, or worse, that has happened. It's now too late for me to do anything about it. I'm interested in how this positions GSCF in the market, because in the world of 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, banks funded and largely owned supply chain finance programs, and then a range of technology vendors enabled them. They would give you the tools to manage a particular program. This feels as though C4 is kind of sitting above that whole stack, and that you're effectively creating a new control layer that's independent of any single funder. And I haven't really seen anybody else doing that. Is that a fair summary of what you're doing, creating something that's completely new?
I do think so. I think we're a category maker. I think GSCF, when you think about what we do and where we sit in the market, we have the largest alternative investment vehicle that is pointed towards for this asset class in the world, to my knowledge. 4.8 billion that we're making active credit decisions on. We're, applying the insurance on. We're managing the programs. We're managing all the payments and the repayments. We're doing that. We think like a funder, where others may think like a platform. So we have this unique ability to look at the view from multiple perspectives around the ecosystem, because we actually reside in all of those seats and we can kind of sit in all of those seats. And we're uniquely connected to both the corporates, our other funding partners, both bank and non-bank. We provide our own non-bank. And so again, our unique ability, I think, and our unique position to provide something new and different to the market and kind of see the gaps that exist, the visibility gap that we've been talking about, the credit gap with being able to fund an entire ecosystem and make the most of your ecosystem, whether you're a supplier or a buyer. And whether you're a funder looking to better manage your operation and grow and scale by leveraging GSCF from a program management perspective, or leveraging GSCF to help you grow in your middle market as a bank funder, where that's not something you can put on your balance sheet, as an example. And so that type of thing just provides us a unique perspective that I don't think others in the market have, which is what has brought us to this view and this vision.
Which brings me to my next question, which would be, this all sounds just obviously a good idea. So why hasn't someone done this before? What prevented this happening, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, I come back to the idea that this industry is so transactional and everything happens at the program level. And it has evolved in a way that it is transactional. It's kind of deal by deal, it's program by program. And when you start to look at some of the recent events, whether that's Greensill or First Brands, they really start to shed light on some of these structural gaps that we have, the visibility gap, the credit gap, the integration gap, and a level of maturity from a system perspective in the adoption kind of gap of technology at the same pace and rate that everyone else in the ecosystem is doing. And so it really starts to shed light on these gaps. And that's where this opportunity, I think, lies, and why we haven't seen the industry do that before, because it has been so program by program. And why now is because I think we're seeing, we're operating in a completely new and different macro environment. I think from a regulatory perspective, we see funders creating new structures and becoming, more creative. You have this huge appetite from the private credit market and those investors fueling that private credit market to get exposure to this asset class with a short-term return view, which then allows for a broader portfolio composition. All those things, I think, start to fuel and create this opportunity here and now.
Which is great, but I'm now going to play devil's advocate. With something like this, there's always a gap between concept and reality. And I've got to say, the concept sounds fantastic, but what are the biggest challenges in getting companies to adopt? It's just kind of a new model, and if I'm here with my spreadsheets and I'm very happy and this is how I work and this is good. But what are the challenges in getting them to adapt to this model like C4? Is it a data integration issue? Is it getting internal alignment, or is it really just changing people's minds to think about this in a new way?
It's a little bit of everything, as you would imagine, right? But when I think about the mindset, right, the mindset is there. What we were just talking about, right? So the current events that are happening, the macro environment that we're in, the opportunities and the possibilities that exist for this asset class, there's the want and the need and the desire to move forward. And so I think that individual mindset is there. It's the collective mindset that I think is the challenge in figuring out and really looking at it as a collective, in the sense of saying, I want to bring my ecosystem forward. I want all of my participants in the ecosystem, all of my funding partners, all of my insurers and risk mitigants. I want all of my buyers and my suppliers. I want to elevate the full thing, because if I, again, tide rises all boats. And so thinking about that, that's the mindset shift. That's the mindset shift that I think we're talking about here, is really looking at the collective ecosystem that you're operating in, and then being able to layer that out to say, okay, they're all not just participating in my ecosystem. There's another ecosystem and another ecosystem and another ecosystem, right? And I just kind of pull us back to this, Artemis 2 and if you heard those astronauts talking about looking at and viewing Earth against this big black space and realizing that, everything we do down here day by day, what exists out there is crazy. And so it's really opening your mind up to realize it's a bigger ecosystem and we can learn more from each other. And if we kind of pull forward everybody, we're all going to elevate.
That's really helpful. It's a great moment to bring this particular episode of The Working Capitalist almost to a close. But I think we're going to see you. We're going to share a stage, in fact, in New York on April 30th. And there's a good chance to see a little bit more of the C4 program and ask questions of your own. If you want to be there at the end of the podcast, just have a look for the link. So if you're a corporate, it's usually free to attend. So you can apply for a corporate place. And if you're a vendor of any kind, speak to us nicely and we'll find you a discount on a ticket. So Shannon, before you go, last question on the working capital list is always, if you like, the $64,000 question. If companies, in your case, start thinking in this more portfolio-driven way about working capital, what's the one piece of advice you would give to them to take away? What's the one thing they need to change first?
Stop measuring at a program level, right? Stop measuring in isolation. Awareness is the first step to anything. And if you're starting to think about portfolio level, if you're starting to think about portfolio first, you're kind of halfway there, right? In the sense of saying, okay, as I said, I think the want, the need, the desire is there. It's how do you get there? And so the first step is to say, okay, well, I've got this program and that program. I got a receivables program and a payables program. What happens if I think about that combined? What opportunity does that open up for me? How can I layer that into my financial plan? How can I make working capital a strategic part of my financial plan to fuel growth? And then where do those opportunities sit for me to maximize that? And so it's really, again, stop thinking about, is this program working? Is this one particular program working? Is my receivables program working? Is my payables program working? It's thinking about and elevating to that level of maturity of working capital.
Excellent. Shannon, that was really insightful, very helpful for me particularly, and I'm sure for our audience, and especially around that shift from the programs to portfolios. I think that's the big message we'll be taking away. Shannon Dolan, thanks very much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.